Hi, I'm Jonah Essers with the Tummy Handbook. Welcome back to my series of videos on food allergies in infants and toddlers. In my previous videos, we discussed the terminology around food allergies, signs and symptoms of food allergies, when to consider allergy testing, and how to consider breastfeeding and formula feed a baby or toddler with food allergies. In this video, we're going to discuss just how strict to be with your food elimination. Now, if you're a breastfeeding mom, you're eating for two. You are a food producing machine. This takes up a lot of bandwidth. Like you don't have enough to do. Sure, you do anything for your child, but food elimination is hard. So understanding how strict you should be is very important. If you're feeding your child table food, you have to read labels. You have to make sure that the spouse, the daycare, the grandparents are all being internally consistent with what foods to give them, like you don't have enough on your plate. So how strict should you be? Let's talk about it. The first thing to do is to discuss the gradations of how strict one can be based on what my families have told me in my office. So the first level of strictness is essentially that you eat whatever you want, which is to say that you are not eliminating the foods at all. From there, the next level of strictness would be to really limit the foods to occasional and small amounts. So for example, I'm dairy free, but I put a little cream in my coffee or a smear of cream cheese on my bagel. From there, the next level of strictness is that you really limit that food to like the 10th ingredient in the ingredient list, or that it's baked into a food. So for example, I'm dairy free, but there's some milk in the chocolate chip cookie as the 10th ingredient. From there, the next level of strictness is that you really don't eat that food at all, but you're willing to accept those foods where there's that disclaimer of may have been made in a factory containing trace amounts of that food. And then from there, there's I don't even touch a molecule of that food. I'm 100% ultra super duper strict. So now that you understand the different gradations to how strict one can be, let's break this down based on whether you have an immediate IgE reaction or a delayed non-IgE reaction. And if you're not sure what an IgE type of reaction is, please visit video number 1, which will go into much more detail on that. But essentially, an IgE type of food allergy is the classic food allergy you've probably heard or seen, which is a little tongue tingling, your throat might get swollen, hives, potentially anaphylaxis or shock. These are relatively quick onset within minutes to a couple hours, potentially life-threatening. So if you think your child is having an IgE-mediated reaction, you really need to start with a board-certified allergist. Only an allergist will be able to do the appropriate testing needed to know how to guide you further. So they might do skin prick testing or blood tests, and from there they'll be able to tell you, is there a real allergy? How severe is it? What's the cost to cheating on that elimination diet? And they'll also give you a prognosis for how long they think that allergy might be present. So until you've had a chance to meet with an allergist, I recommend that you be very, very strict with that food elimination. Let's transition and talk about non-IgE mediated reactions. These are reactions that are usually delayed. They usually start after several hours, if not days to weeks after repeated exposures. And generally the symptoms are things like eczema, mucus or blood in the stool, increased spit-ups or vomiting, tummy pain. And with non-IgE mediated reactions, the first concept here is that there is no test to make the diagnosis. The best test to know what foods your kid might be allergic to is to actually eliminate the food and see if your child feels better. So if you're in the phase where you still aren't sure what food is causing the reaction and you've decided to eliminate, let's say, dairy, well, in that early phase, you should be very strict with that elimination. That way you can know if it's a real allergy. If you're only 75% strict and your child doesn't feel better, how do you know if they're actually allergic to that food? You're waiting for them to get better. So in that early phase, please be super strict. Let's say you've eliminated a food and your child does feel better, but isn't all better, and you've decided to eliminate even more foods. During that phase, with ongoing additional food elimination, you should continue to be strict with the foods you've already eliminated. You're still in that diagnosis phase. You still aren't sure, and you don't want to introduce any variables. So if you've removed dairy, your child's 80% better, you're looking for other allergens. If you start to cheat on the dairy while you're doing other food eliminations, and your child doesn't feel better, how do you know that it isn't just because they reintroduced some dairy? So again, be super strict during the diagnosis phase. Once you've figured out all the foods that are causing the problem and your child feels better, then it's reasonable to consider whether to relax how strict you are with the diet. And I recommend going in reverse order. So for example, if you are 100% super duper strict, you don't touch a molecule of dairy, and then your child feels better, then you could consider introducing foods that have the disclaimer, maybe was made in a factory that may contain trace amounts of dairy. If that goes well, you might consider increasing that to foods that have a small amount of baked-in dairy, a chocolate chip cookie where dairy is the 20th ingredient on the list. And most families will report a threshold effect where the more they relax the diet, the more likely they are to see a reaction. So if you do see a reaction, like a return of some eczema or some tummy pain, then you would want to pull back on your strictness to the point at which your child was feeling well. So, in summary, for IgE immediate reactions, I recommend being super strict until you've had a chance to meet with an allergist who should be able to give you the appropriate testing and guidance in terms of how strict to be. For potentially non-IgE type of reactions that are delayed in onset with symptoms that are not very severe, you definitely want to be super strict in the early outset when you're trying to make the diagnosis of what foods are causing the allergy. Once your child feels better and you know what foods need to be eliminated, you can consider relaxing some of those restrictions and see how your child does. All of those should be done with guidance from your primary care doctor, and you should have those discussions in advance before considering introducing a food that your child might be allergic to. Thanks again for watching, and as always, if you have questions for me, please leave them in the comments section below, and if you want to learn more about me, visit my Instagram account at the link below. Thanks again.